This isn't your home anymore, Mom. You need to accept that." Those were the words my daughter Vanessa screamed at me in my own living room, the house I'd lived in for 47 years. She thought I was a helpless old woman who had nowhere else to go. But what I did next left her standing on the sidewalk with her mouth open and her whole world crashing down. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Follow my story until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far the story reaches across the world. At 70 years old, I thought I understood betrayal. I'd buried my husband Theodore 5 years ago after 44 years of marriage. I'd watched friends pass away and children move across the country for their careers. But standing in the kitchen of the house where I'd raised my 4 children, watching my youngest daughter Vanessa redecorate like I was already dead, I realized some wounds still had the power to take your breath away. My name is Beatrice Thornfield, and this is my story about the day I discovered that the child I'd sacrificed everything for had been planning to steal my life right out from under me. The house on Willowbrook Lane in Riverview Heights had been our family's sanctuary since 1976. Theodore and I had bought it as young parents with our second child on the way and a mortgage that seemed insurmountable at the time. We'd painted every room ourselves during weekends when the children napped, planted the magnolia tree in the front yard that now towered over the roofline, and watched our children take their first steps on the oak hardwood floors we'd painstakingly refinished by hand during one memorable summer. Every corner of this house held memories that were woven into the fabric of my existence. The kitchen, where I'd taught all 4 children to cook, where Theodore had surprised me with birthday cakes made from scratch, where we'd held countless family meetings around the old farmhouse table. The living room, where we'd opened Christmas presents for decades, where I'd rocked babies to sleep during midnight feedings, where Theodore and I had danced to our wedding song on our anniversary each year. The master bedroom, where all my babies had slept in their bassinet those first precious months, where Theodore and I had whispered our dreams and fears in the darkness, where I'd held his hand as he took his final breath 5 years ago. The basement workshop, where Theodore had built toys and furniture, teaching our sons Marcus and James the art of woodworking, while our daughters Vanessa and Patricia had helped me preserve vegetables from our garden each fall. After Theodore's funeral, the house felt simultaneously too big and too small. Too big because the silence echoed in rooms that had once been filled with laughter and conversation. Too small because every space was saturated with memories that sometimes threatened to overwhelm me. But it was still mine, still home. The mortgage had been paid off for 18 years. The property taxes were manageable on my teacher's pension and Theodore's life insurance. And I had established my routines that kept me anchored to life. Monday mornings, I would tend to my garden, the one Theodore and I had expanded year after year until it covered nearly a quarter of our backyard. Tuesday afternoons meant grocery shopping at Henderson's Market, where I'd shopped for 4 decades and where young Tommy Henderson still called me Mrs. T and asked about my children. Wednesday evenings were for my book club with my neighbor Constance and 3 other women who'd become my closest friends over the years. Thursday mornings, I volunteered at the Riverview Elementary School library, reading to first graders who reminded me of my own children at that age. Friday afternoons, I would clean house thoroughly. Saturday mornings were for errands and household projects, and Sundays were reserved for family dinners when any of my children could make the drive from their respective cities. It was a quiet life, perhaps, but it was my life. I'd earned every peaceful moment after raising 4 children largely on my own while Theodore worked long hours building his accounting practice. I'd earned the right to sit on my back porch with my morning coffee, watching the birds at the feeder Theodore had hung from the maple tree 22 years ago. I'd earned the right to sleep late on Saturdays if I wanted, to eat dinner at 5:30 or 8:30, depending on my mood, to leave dishes in the sink overnight if I was too tired to wash them. But Vanessa had other plans for my future, and she'd been laying the groundwork for months without my knowledge. It started innocuously enough. Vanessa had always been my most attentive child after Theodore's death, calling twice a week and visiting at least twice a month, despite living 2 hours away in the state capital, where her husband Bradley worked as a commercial real estate broker. She'd bring their 16-year-old daughter Sophia to visit, and we'd have lovely afternoons together. I cherished these visits, grateful that my youngest child seemed to understand how important family time had become to me in my widowhood. But looking back now, I can see that those visits weren't just about spending time with her grieving mother. They were reconnaissance missions. "Mom, this house is so beautiful," she'd say, running her hands along the crown molding in the dining room. "The craftsmanship is incredible. They don't build houses like this anymore." "How many square feet is it total?" Bradley would ask, pulling out his phone to make notes. "The lot size is impressive too. Quarter acre."
"Actually, it's a third of an acre," I'd respond proudly. "Your father and I specifically wanted enough space for a proper garden and for you children to have room to play." They'd exchange glances that I didn't understand at the time, glances that now seem loaded with significance. "Have you ever had the house appraised, Mom?" Vanessa asked during one visit about 6 months after Theodore's funeral. "Just for insurance purposes, you want to make sure you're adequately covered." "The insurance company requires an appraisal every few years," I'd told her. "It was done just before your father passed. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. Just making sure you're protected. This neighborhood has really appreciated in value over the years." I should have paid more attention to these seemingly innocent questions, should have noticed how Bradley would walk through the house during their visits with the calculating gaze of someone assessing value rather than admiring a family home. Should have wondered why Vanessa started taking photos of every room, claiming she wanted to remember how beautiful the house looked for a scrapbook she was making. The first real warning sign came 8 months ago, during what I thought was just another family dinner. Vanessa had brought a bottle of wine, an expensive vintage that she said was a gift from Bradley's company. We'd had a lovely meal, and I was feeling relaxed and grateful for my daughter's attention when she brought up the subject that would haunt me for months to come. "Mom, Bradley and I have been talking, and we're a little concerned about you living here alone," she said, refilling my wine glass even though I'd barely touched the first serving. "It's such a big house for one person." "I've been living here alone for almost a year now. I'm managing perfectly well." "But are you, really?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photographs. "Look at this guttering situation, and this crack in the front walkway. The paint on the north side of the house is starting to peel." I looked at the photos confused. "When did you take these?" "Last week when I was here." "Mom, I don't think you're seeing these problems because you're inside the house all the time. But from the outside, it's clear that maintenance is becoming an issue." The photos showed minor cosmetic issues that come with any house that's nearly 50 years old. A small section of guttering that had pulled slightly away from the roof line during the last big storm, a hairline crack in the concrete walkway that had been there for 15 years, paint that was perhaps due for refreshing, but was hardly in critical condition. These are normal maintenance items, Vanessa, nothing that can be handled with a phone call to a handyman. But that's exactly the point, Mom. You shouldn't have to worry about handymen and contractors and all these maintenance issues. Wouldn't it be nice to live somewhere where someone else handles all of that for you? That was the first time she mentioned the concept that would become her obsession, moving me out of my home and into what she euphemistically called a more suitable living situation. "I've been researching some wonderful senior living communities," she continued, pulling out a folder I hadn't noticed she'd brought with her. "Look at this place, Sunset Gardens. It's beautiful, Mom. Restaurant-style dining, housekeeping services, organized activities, transportation to shopping and medical appointments. You'd have your own apartment, but with all the benefits of community living." I flipped through the glossy brochures she'd handed me, looking at photos of smiling elderly people playing cards, doing water aerobics, and eating meals in an elegant dining room. It looked pleasant enough, but it wasn't home. "I'm sure it's very nice for people who want that kind of lifestyle," I said carefully, "but I'm happy here. This is my home." "But Mom, what happens if you fall down the stairs? What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds you for days? What if the house becomes too much for you to maintain properly? I have neighbors who check on me, I have my medical alert bracelet, and I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my own home. But are you, though? The question hung in the air with more weight than seemed appropriate. Because honestly, Mom, some of us have been noticing things. What things? Well, last month when Marcus visited, he mentioned that you seemed confused about what day it was, and Patricia said you repeated the same story 3 times during your last phone conversation. And I've noticed that you sometimes forget things we've discussed. I felt a chill run down my spine. These were normal occurrences for anyone, moments of absent-mindedness that happen to people of all ages. But the way Vanessa was presenting them, they sounded like evidence of cognitive decline. I'm 70 years old, Vanessa. Sometimes I forget what day it is because the days blend together when you're retired. Sometimes I repeat stories because I enjoy telling them. That doesn't mean I'm incompetent. Of course not. No one is saying you're incompetent. We're just saying that maybe it's time to consider options that would give you more support and less responsibility. That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew in the weeks that followed. Vanessa began calling more frequently, always with questions that seemed designed to test my memory or my judgment. She'd ask if I remembered conversations we'd had, if I'd paid certain bills, if I'd kept appointments with my doctor. When I'd answer correctly, she'd seem almost disappointed. She also began showing up unannounced more often, always with an excuse about being in the neighborhood or wanting to check on something in the house. She'd walk through the rooms with a critical eye, pointing out dust on surfaces I'd missed, light bulbs that needed changing, or organizational issues in my closets.
Mom, when was the last time you cleaned out this pantry? She asked during one impromptu visit, standing in my kitchen with her hands on her hips. Some of these canned goods are expired. I cleaned it out 3 months ago, I replied. Those cans are only a few months past their expiration date. Canned goods are safe for years after the printed date. But what if you accidentally eat something spoiled? What if you get food poisoning? At your age, that could be really dangerous. She made it sound like I was teetering on the edge of disaster, that every mundane aspect of independent living was a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. And slowly, insidiously, I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was missing things. Maybe the house was becoming too much for me. Maybe my children could see problems that I was blind to. The campaign intensified 3 months ago when Vanessa started bringing reinforcements to our family gatherings. Bradley would arrive with his measuring tape and his real estate knowledge, walking through the house and commenting on everything from the condition of the hardwood floors to the efficiency of the heating system. "This boiler's probably original to the house," he said during one visit, standing in my basement and shaking his head. "These old systems are incredibly inefficient. Your heating costs must be astronomical." "They're perfectly reasonable," I replied. "Theodore maintained the system religiously, and I have it serviced every year." "But think about how much you could save with a modern system. Of course, it would cost thousands to upgrade, and at your age, you'd never recoup the investment." He had a way of making every aspect of my homeownership sound like a burden or a mistake, every maintenance issue sound like an insurmountable problem, every expense sound unreasonable for someone in my situation. Sophia, my 16-year-old granddaughter, was recruited into the campaign as well. During visits, she'd make comments that sounded innocent but carried undertones that made me uncomfortable. "Grandma B, don't you get lonely in this big house all by yourself? I'd be scared to live alone in a place this big. Wouldn't it be fun to live somewhere with lots of other people to talk to? Like a sleepover that never ends. Some of those senior communities have game rooms and moving aids and everything." Even my own granddaughter was being used as a weapon in their campaign to convince me that my life needed to be completely reorganized according to their vision of what was appropriate for a woman my age. But the most insidious part of their strategy was how they'd already begun making themselves at home in my house, acting as though my eventual departure was a foregone conclusion, and they were simply managing the transition. Vanessa had started rearranging furniture to make the space more functional and easier for you to navigate safely, Mom. She'd moved my favorite reading chair away from the window where I'd sat for 20 years, claiming the lighting was bad for my eyes. She'd reorganized my kitchen cabinets to make things more accessible, but really to suit her own preferences for where things should be stored. Bradley had begun storing boxes of files from his real estate office in my basement, claiming it was just temporary while they renovated their home office. But the boxes had been there for months, and more kept appearing with each visit. They'd started keeping spare clothes in my guest room closet, toiletries in my guest room bathroom, and non-perishable food items in my pantry. Bit by bit, my house was being colonized by their possessions while they simultaneously argued that it was too much space for me to manage alone. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was having my coffee on the back porch, reading the newspaper and watching the cardinals at the bird feeder, when I heard the familiar sound of car doors slamming in my driveway. But when I looked toward the front of the house, I saw not just Vanessa's silver SUV, but 2 other vehicles as well. I walked to the front door to find Vanessa, Bradley, and a woman I didn't recognize standing on my porch. The stranger was wearing a navy blue blazer and carrying a leather portfolio, her smile professionally warm but impersonal. "Mom, I hope you don't mind that we're a little early," Vanessa said, letting herself into my house without waiting for an invitation. "I wanted to introduce you to someone special." The stranger extended her hand with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm Rebecca Martinez from Golden Years Living Solutions. I'm so pleased to meet you. Vanessa has told me so much about you." I shook her hand automatically while my mind tried to process what was happening. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I wasn't expecting any visitors today." "I know this is unexpected, Mom," Vanessa said, already moving into my living room and gesturing for the others to follow. "But Rebecca had a cancellation this morning, and I thought it would be perfect timing for her to tell you about some of the wonderful options available to you." "What decisions?" I asked, feeling like I'd walked into the middle of a conversation that had been going on without me. "Well, that's exactly why we're here," Bradley interjected, settling into my husband's recliner like he belonged there. "To help you explore your options before circumstances force your hand." Rebecca spread glossy brochures across my coffee table, each one featuring photos of elegant buildings surrounded by manicured gardens, smiling elderly residents engaged in various activities, and spacious apartment interiors that looked more like hotel suites than nursing home rooms. "These are 3 of the premier communities in our region," she explained. "Sunset Manor, which is about 20 minutes from here, Meadowbrook Estates, which is closer to where Vanessa lives, and Golden Oaks, which is our newest and most luxurious facility." I picked up one of the brochures, looking at photos of people who looked nothing like me, enjoying activities I had no interest in. "These look very nice, but I'm not interested in moving anywhere. This is my home." "Of course it is," Rebecca said, with that practice empathy that service professionals perfect. "And I can see why you love it here. It's a beautiful house. But Vanessa has shared some concerns about the challenges of maintaining a property this size. And I have to say, those concerns are very valid." "What concerns?" I looked at my daughter, feeling betrayed by this ambush. "Vanessa, what have you been telling this woman?" "Just the truth, Mom, the truth about the maintenance issues, about the isolation, about our worries that something could happen to you here and no one would know." Rebecca nodded sympathetically. "These are concerns we hear from families all the time, Mrs. Thornfield. Adult children who love their parents but worry about their safety and well-being. The good news is that there are solutions." She launched into a presentation about the benefits of senior living: professional maintenance staff, 24-hour emergency response, social activities, restaurant-style dining, housekeeping services, transportation to medical appointments and shopping. She made it sound like a luxury resort rather than the end of independent living. "And the best part," she concluded, "is that you can maintain your independence while having the security of knowing that help is always available if you need it." What about my things? I asked, looking around at the furniture Theodore and I had collected over decades, the photographs covering every surface, the books that filled built-in shelves throughout the house. What happens to all of this? That's one of the services we provide, Rebecca said smoothly. We have partnerships with estate sale companies and donation organizations. We can handle the entire process of sorting, selling, and donating your belongings, so you don't have to worry about any of that. The casual way she discussed disposing of my life's accumulation of treasures made my stomach clench. These weren't just belongings to be sorted and sold. They were the physical manifestations of a lifetime of memories, the tangible connections to the people and experiences that had shaped my existence. I appreciate you taking the time to visit, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to make any decisions about this. I need time to think. Vanessa's patience, which had been held in check by Rebecca's presence, finally cracked. Mom, how much time do you need? We've been discussing this for months. You keep saying you need to think about it, but you're not actually thinking. You're just avoiding the reality of your situation. My situation? I felt my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. What exactly is my situation, Vanessa? You're 70 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, trying to maintain a lifestyle that's becoming increasingly unsafe and impractical. According to who? I feel perfectly safe and practical. I've been managing my own life for 70 years. But have you? Really? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're struggling more than you want to admit. Rebecca, sensing the family tension that was threatening to derail her sales presentation, tried to intervene with professional diplomacy. Why don't I leave these brochures with you, Mrs. Thornfield, and you can take some time to look them over. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. But the damage was done. The facade of a caring family conversation had cracked, revealing the underlying agenda that had been driving these visits for months. After Rebecca left, promising to follow up in a few days, I found myself alone with Vanessa and Bradley in the living room where I'd raised my children, and the conversation that followed would shatter what remained of my trust in my youngest daughter. Mom, we need to be honest with each other, Vanessa began, her voice taking on the tone she'd used as a teenager when she was trying to convince me she was mature enough for some privilege she wanted. This house is becoming a problem. How is my house a problem? It's not just the house, Mom. It's everything. The maintenance, the isolation, the way you're starting to slip a little bit. Slip how? Bradley cleared his throat, pulling out his phone. Dorothy, we've been keeping track of some incidents that concern us. The fact that he'd been keeping track of anything about my behavior sent a chill down my spine. But I listened as he read from his notes. 3 weeks ago, you called Vanessa twice in one day asking the same question about Marcus's work schedule. 2 weeks ago, you forgot that Patricia was coming to visit and weren't here when she arrived. Last week, you left your car running for over an hour after you came home from the grocery store.
Each incident he mentioned was true, but his presentation made them sound like evidence of serious cognitive decline rather than the minor moments of forgetfulness that happen to everyone. People forget things, Bradley. People of all ages forget things. But at your age, these kinds of memory lapses can be early warning signs of more serious problems, Vanessa said. We're not trying to scare you, Mom, but we'd be irresponsible if we ignored these red flags. I felt like I was being put on trial for the crime of being human and imperfect. Every small mistake, every moment of absent-mindedness, every sign that I was not a perfect managing machine was being used as evidence that I was incompetent to run my own life. I am not incompetent, I said firmly. I pay my bills on time, I take care of my health, I maintain my home, and I manage my daily life perfectly well. But for how much longer? The question came from Vanessa, but the calculation behind it felt like it came from Bradley. Mom, we're not talking about taking away your independence. We're talking about setting you up for success as you age. Success according to who?
I feel pretty successful right here in my own home. Mom, please just listen to what we're trying to tell you. Vanessa's voice carried a note of desperation that should have been my final warning. We love you, and we want what's best for you, but sometimes love means making difficult decisions. What decisions? I'm the only one who gets to make decisions about my life. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken threats. Vanessa and Bradley exchanged a look that spoke volumes about conversations they'd had without me, plans they'd made that didn't include my input. Mom, Vanessa said, finally, we really hoped we could do this the easy way. Do what the easy way? Convince you to make the smart choice on your own. But if you're not going to be reasonable about this, then we're going to have to explore other options. The words hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. I understood exactly what she was threatening without her having to say it explicitly. You're talking about having me declared incompetent. We're talking about doing whatever we have to do to keep you safe, Bradley said, his voice trying to sound compassionate but failing to hide the steel underneath. Even if that means making decisions you don't like. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd carried in my body, nursed through childhood illnesses, supported through college and career struggles and relationship dramas. This woman who was sitting in my living room, in the house where I raised her, threatening to have me legally declared incompetent so she could take control of my life? You wouldn't dare. We don't want to, Mom, and I could hear the lie in her voice. But we will if we have to. We've already spoken to a lawyer about what the process would involve. The betrayal of that statement hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been pressuring me to move out of my home. They'd been consulting lawyers about how to force me out legally. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? I whispered. We've been trying to help you plan for your future, Vanessa replied, but she couldn't meet my eyes. No, you've been planning my future without me. You've been scheming about how to get me out of my house so you can, what, sell it? Keep it for yourselves? Mom, this isn't about the house. Don't lie to me, Vanessa. I raised you. I know when you're lying. The mask finally slipped completely, and I saw my daughter's true face for the first time in months. Fine, she said, her voice cold and hard. Yes, this house is worth a lot of money. Yes, maintaining it is expensive and impractical for someone your age. And yes, we think the smart thing would be to sell it while it's still in good condition and use that money to pay for proper care for you. Proper care? You mean the kind of care where I don't get to make my own decisions anymore? I mean, the kind of care where you're safe and looked after and not struggling to maintain a lifestyle you can't handle anymore. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 70 years in my bones, but also feeling something else, something harder and more determined than I'd felt in months. Get out of my house. Mom, get out of my house. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that had been pushed too far and was finally pushing back. They gathered their things with the wounded air of people who felt they were being unfairly attacked for trying to help, but I could see the calculation in their eyes, the wheels turning as they considered their next move. You have 2 weeks to think about this, Mom. After that, we start making decisions for you. As I watched their car pull out of my driveway, I realized that my daughter wasn't trying to help me transition to the next phase of my life. She was trying to steal the life I had left. But Vanessa had made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She thought she was dealing with a helpless old woman who had no choices left, no resources to fight back, no power to resist their plans for her future. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The days following Vanessa's ultimatum passed in a haze of sleepless nights and restless anxiety. I found myself walking through my house like a stranger, seeing it through the eyes of my daughter and son-in-law for the first time. Was the paint really peeling as badly as they claimed? Were the hardwood floors showing their age more than I'd noticed? Had I become blind to the flaws that seemed so obvious to them? I stood in my kitchen at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, staring at the copper pots hanging from the rack Theodore had installed 30 years ago. These weren't just cookware. They were the vessels in which I'd prepared thousands of family meals, birthday cakes, holiday feasts, and simple Tuesday night dinners. The largest pot had a small dent from the time 8-year-old Marcus had knocked it off the counter while helping me make soup. The medium saucepan bore burn marks from the Christmas morning I'd gotten distracted by the children opening presents and let the cranberry sauce scorch. Were these cherished imperfections or signs of a woman who could no longer properly maintain her possessions? I walked through the living room, running my fingers along the back of the sofa where Theodore and I had spent countless evenings reading together, where I'd nursed 4 babies, where the children had built blanket forts and performed amateur theatrical productions. The fabric was worn in places, faded where the afternoon sun had touched it for decades. To me, these were signs of a life well lived. To Vanessa and Bradley, they were apparently evidence of decline. In the master bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed Theodore and I had shared for over 4 decades, looking at the wedding photo on my nightstand. We'd been so young, so certain that love would be enough to carry us through whatever challenges life might bring. Theodore had promised to love and cherish me until death parted us, and he'd kept that promise. But he'd never promised to protect me from our own children. The sunrise found me in the garden, my hands deep in the soil of the raised beds Theodore had built when arthritis made ground-level gardening difficult for me. The tomatoes were coming along beautifully, the herbs were thriving, and the flower beds were a riot of color that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds throughout the summer. This garden represented 20 years of careful cultivation, soil improvement, and seasonal planning. According to Vanessa's logic, I should abandon all of this to move into a sterile apartment where someone else would decide what I could grow, if anything. My neighbor Constance found me there at 7:30, weeding with the desperate intensity of someone trying to lose herself in familiar routines. "Beatrice, honey, you're out early this morning," she called from her back porch where she was collecting her newspaper. At 74, Constance moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind remained sharp, and her friendship invaluable. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, sitting back on my heels and wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my gardening glove. Constance made her way across the yard that separated our properties, moving carefully but determinedly. We'd been neighbors for 38 years, had raised our children together, had supported each other through illnesses, deaths, divorces, and every other crisis that life could deliver. "Want to talk about what's keeping you awake?" she asked, settling onto the garden bench Theodore had built near the back fence. I'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that Constance would see through any attempt to minimize what was happening. But I also desperately needed someone to talk to, someone who knew me well enough to see beyond the narrative Vanessa was constructing about my declining capabilities. Vanessa wants me to move out of the house. She thinks I can't handle living here anymore. Constance was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. "And what do you think?" "I think my daughter has convinced herself that I'm incompetent so she can feel better about stealing my home." The words came out more harshly than I had intended, but once they were spoken, I realized they contained more truth than I'd been willing to admit even to myself. Constance studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd known me for nearly 40 years. "Tell me what's been happening," she asked. So I did. I told her about the months of increasingly frequent visits, the criticism disguised as concern, the way Vanessa and Bradley had begun treating my house like their personal storage facility. I described the ambush with Rebecca Martinez, the threats about legal action, and the ultimatum that hung over my head like a sword. When I finished, Constance was quiet for several minutes, her expression thoughtful and troubled. Beatrice, in all the years I've known you, have I ever seen you struggle to manage your home or your life? No, I said without hesitation. Have you ever given me cause to worry about your safety or your judgment? No. Have you ever shown signs of the kind of cognitive decline that would justify someone else making decisions about your living situation? No. My voice was stronger now, more certain. Then what we're talking about isn't concern for your welfare, Constance said firmly. What we're talking about is something else entirely. That evening, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I called my other children. Marcus lived 4 hours away in the university town where he worked as a chemistry professor. James had moved to California after college and worked in software development. Patricia lived 3 hours north with her husband and 2 teenage children.
I started with Marcus, my eldest, the child who'd always been most like Theodore in his thoughtful, analytical approach to problems. "Mom, how are you doing?" His voice carried genuine warmth and concern when he answered the phone. "I was just thinking about you." "I'm fine, sweetheart, but I wanted to talk to you about something. Have you been discussing my living situation with Vanessa?" There was a pause. "She's mentioned that she's worried about you living alone in such a big house. Why? What exactly has she told you?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound upset." "I'm upset because your sister has given me an ultimatum to move out of my home, and she's threatened to have me declared incompetent if I refuse." The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call might have dropped. "She what?" Marcus's voice carried a tone I rarely heard from my calm, measured eldest son. I told him everything. The campaign of criticism, the documentation of my supposed memory lapses, the consultation with lawyers, and the 2-week deadline Vanessa had imposed. "Mom, this is insane," Marcus said when I finished. "You're one of the most competent people I know. When I visited last month, you seemed completely fine, sharp as ever." "According to Vanessa, you told her I seemed confused about what day it was?" "What? No, absolutely not. We talked about how much you were enjoying retirement, how beautiful your garden looked, how well you were managing everything on your own. I specifically remember thinking how impressive it was that you were thriving so well without Dad." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to sit down. "She told me you were concerned about my memory." "That's a complete lie, Mom. I've never expressed any concerns about your memory or your ability to live independently. If anything, I've been amazed by how well you've adapted to being on your own." My conversation with James yielded similar results. Not only had he never expressed concerns about my competency, but he was outraged to learn what Vanessa had been telling me. "Mom, this is financial elder abuse. That's what it's called when family members manipulate elderly relatives to gain control of their assets. You need to protect yourself." Patricia was equally supportive and equally horrified by what she was hearing. "Beatrice, I told Vanessa just last month how proud I was of how independently you were living. I specifically said you were an inspiration for how I wanted to age when my time came. She's been completely misrepresenting what all of us have said." Armed with this validation from my other children, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: righteous anger. Vanessa hadn't just been pressuring me to make a decision I didn't want to make. She'd been systematically lying to me about my other children's concerns, manufacturing a false consensus about my declining abilities, and manipulating me with fabricated evidence of my incompetence. But my anger was tempered by a deeper sadness. This was my youngest child,
the daughter who'd been closest to me throughout her life, the child I'd worried about most because she'd always seemed more vulnerable than her siblings. The realization that she was capable of such calculated deception felt like a death. The death of the daughter I thought I knew. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having my coffee on the back porch when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the front window, I could see a silver luxury sedan in my driveway, expensive enough that it looked out of place in my middle-class neighborhood. The woman at my door was perhaps 60, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, her makeup professionally applied, and her smile carried the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to dealing with delicate situations. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm Eleanor Ashford from Ashford Estate Management. I was hoping I could have a few minutes of your time to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "Oh, I'm not selling anything, Mrs. Thornfield. I'm here because I understand that you may be considering some changes to your living situation, and I wanted to discuss some options that your daughter might not have mentioned." The mention of Vanessa made my stomach clench. "How do you know my daughter?" "May I come in? This is a rather delicate matter to discuss on your doorstep." Against my better judgment, I invited Eleanor Ashford into my living room, where she settled onto my sofa with the confidence of someone who was comfortable in expensive surroundings. "Mrs. Thornfield, I understand that your family has been encouraging you to consider senior living options." "How could you possibly know that?" Eleanor smiled with what seemed like genuine sympathy. "Because your son-in-law Bradley contacted our firm about managing the sale of your property. He indicated that you'd be moving to assisted living in the near future and that the family was looking for professional estate management services." The room seemed to tilt around me. "He did what?"
I have to say, Mrs. Thornfield, when I drove up and saw your beautiful home, and when I met you just now, I was surprised. Bradley made it sound like you were in failing health and desperate to liquidate your assets. You seem perfectly competent to make your own decisions about your living situation. I felt like I was drowning. They contacted you about selling my house? Not just selling it, Mrs. Thornfield. They wanted us to handle what they called a complete estate liquidation. Selling the house, disposing of the contents, managing all the financial aspects of transitioning you to care. It's a comprehensive service we provide for families dealing with elderly relatives who can no longer manage their own affairs. But I'm managing my affairs perfectly well. That's exactly what I thought when I met you, which is why I'm here unofficially, Mrs. Thornfield. What your family is proposing isn't appropriate for someone in your situation, and I felt you should know what was being discussed behind your back. The betrayal was so complete, so stunning in its scope, that I couldn't immediately process it. Not only had Vanessa and Bradley been planning to force me out of my home, they'd already been making arrangements for its sale and the disposal of my possessions. "How long ago did they contact you?" I managed to ask. "About 6 weeks ago. They said they expected the transition to happen within the next month or two, and they wanted to have everything in place so the process could move quickly once you agreed to the move." 6 weeks ago. Long before the ultimatum, long before the consultation with Rebecca Martinez, long before they'd even told me directly that they thought I should move. They'd been planning this for months, treating my agreement as a foregone conclusion while lying to my face about their intentions. Mrs. Thornfield, I have to ask, do you want to sell your house and move to assisted living? Absolutely not. Eleanor nodded as if this confirmed what she'd suspected. Then you should know that your family has no legal right to force this decision on you. Unless you've been declared incompetent by a court, which would require medical evidence of cognitive impairment, no one can make these choices for you. They've threatened to start competency proceedings. Based on what evidence? Have you been diagnosed with dementia?
Are you unable to manage your finances? Are you a danger to yourself or others? No, no, and no. Then they're bluffing, Mrs. Thornfield. Competency proceedings requires substantial medical evidence. A few instances of forgetfulness or minor home maintenance issues aren't grounds for having someone declared incompetent. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe fully. They've been documenting things they claim show I'm declining, forgetting conversations, leaving my car running, that sort of thing. Eleanor's expression hardened. Mrs. Thornfield, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen families who genuinely need help managing a loved one's decline, and I've seen families who are more interested in managing a loved one's assets. Based on what I'm hearing, your situation sounds more like the latter. After Eleanor left, promising to call me if Bradley contacted her firm again, I sat in my living room feeling like I was seeing my life from a completely different perspective. The house that Vanessa claimed was too much for me to maintain looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but now I saw it through the eyes of someone who understood its value, not just its financial worth. Though Eleanor had mentioned that properties in my neighborhood were selling for far more than I'd realized, but its value as the foundation of my independence and dignity. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Theodore's death. I called a lawyer. Margaret Chen had handled Theodore's estate planning and had been our family attorney for 15 years. She was perhaps my age, a small woman with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that had always made me feel confident in her advice. "Beatrice, it's so good to hear from you. How are you managing? I'm being threatened by my own daughter, and I need to understand my rights." Margaret's tone shifted immediately to professional alertness. "Tell me what's happening." I gave her the full story, from the months of pressure to the ultimatum to the discovery that Vanessa and Bradley had already been making arrangements for the sale of my property. "Beatrice, this is a textbook case of what we call undue influence. Adult children pressuring an elderly parent to make financial decisions that benefit the children rather than the parent. It's more common than you might think, and it's definitely something we can address. What are my options? First, you should know that everything you've described to me suggests that you're perfectly competent to make your own decisions. No court would declare you incompetent based on the evidence you've described. Second, we can take steps to protect you from this kind of pressure. What kind of steps? We can draft new estate planning documents that make your wishes crystal clear. We can establish protections that prevent anyone from accessing your finances without your explicit consent. And if necessary, we can pursue legal action against anyone who attempts to coerce you into making decisions you don't want to make. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some power in this situation. I want to do all of that. I'll have my secretary schedule an appointment for you to come in next week. But Beatrice, I want you to be very careful in the meantime. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't let anyone pressure you into making decisions while you're feeling overwhelmed."
That evening, I stood in my garden as the sun set, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance among the flowers Theodore and I had planted together. The house behind me glowed with warm light from the windows, looking exactly like the home it had always been. Not too big, not too much to maintain, not a burden or a problem to be solved. It was my home, my life, my choice, and I was finally ready to fight for it. The next morning brought another unwelcome surprise. I was washing my breakfast dishes when I saw Vanessa's SUV pull into my driveway, followed immediately by a vehicle I didn't recognize. Through the kitchen window, I watched my daughter emerge from her car along with a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. They approached my front door with the determined stride of people who believed they held all the cards, and for a moment I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. But then I remembered my conversation with Margaret Chen, Eleanor Ashford's validation, and my other children's support. I wasn't a helpless old woman being manipulated by caring family members. I was the victim of a calculated campaign to steal my independence and my assets. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door with the confidence of someone defending her own territory. "Hello, Vanessa. I wasn't expecting you today." "Mom, I'd like you to meet Dr. Richard Pemberton. He's a geriatric psychiatrist, and we've asked him to conduct an assessment of your living situation." Dr. Pemberton stepped forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of expensive grooming that suggested he was used to dealing with wealthy families, and his manner carried the subtle condescension that some medical professionals adopt when dealing with elderly patients. "Mrs. Thornfield, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your daughter has expressed some concerns about your ability to live independently, and I'm here to help determine what level of support might be beneficial for you." I felt a surge of rage so pure and powerful that it took my breath away. They'd brought a psychiatrist to my home to declare me incompetent, without my consent, without any legal authority, and apparently without any shame about what they were attempting. "Dr. Pemberton," I said with icy politeness, "did my daughter explain to you that I have not requested any kind of psychiatric assessment and that I do not consent to any such evaluation?" His smile faltered slightly. "Well, Mrs. Thornfield, sometimes family members are the first to notice when additional support might be helpful. I'm just here to have a conversation and see how you're managing." "I'm managing perfectly well, thank you. And since I have not requested your services and do not consent to any evaluation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Vanessa stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. Dr. Pemberton has taken time out of his busy schedule to help us understand your needs." "My needs are very simple, Vanessa. I need my family to respect my right to make my own decisions about my life. Since you seem unable to do that, I need you to leave as well." "We're your family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've been treating me." As I watched them drive away, Dr. Pemberton looking relieved to escape the situation and Vanessa looking furious and determined, I realized that this was only the beginning. My daughter wasn't going to give up simply because I'd refused to cooperate with her first attempt at having me evaluated. She was going to escalate, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. I spent the rest of the day on the phone with Margaret Chen, describing the morning's events and discussing strategies for protecting myself from further harassment. "Beatrice, what they attempted today was completely inappropriate. Bringing a psychiatrist to conduct an involuntary evaluation has no legal standing whatsoever, but it tells us that they're serious about pursuing this, and we need to be serious about protecting you. What can we do?"
Several things. First, I'm going to draft a letter to your daughter and son-in-law making it clear that any further attempts to harass you or interfere with your decision-making will result in legal action. Second, we're going to establish clear documentation of your competency and your wishes regarding your living situation. Third, we're going to make sure that all your financial accounts and legal documents are structured in a way that prevents anyone from accessing them without your explicit consent. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, I thought about the conversation Theodore and I had had just a few months before his death. He'd been worried about leaving me alone, concerned about how I'd manage the house and the finances and all the responsibilities we'd shared for so many years. "You're stronger than you think, Bea," he'd told me, using the nickname only he had ever called me. "You've been taking care of everyone else for so long that you've forgotten how capable you are on your own." I'd thought he was just trying to comfort me, to ease his own worries about dying before me. But sitting there in the garden we'd built together, in the house we'd filled with love and laughter and the chaos of raising 4 children, I realized he'd been right. I was stronger than I'd thought.
and I was about to prove it to everyone who'd underestimated me, starting with my own daughter. The phone rang as I was getting ready for bed, and I saw Sophia's name on the caller ID. My 16-year-old granddaughter had never called me directly before. All our conversations had been filtered through Vanessa. "Grandma Bia?" Her voice sounded small and uncertain. "Hello, sweetheart. It's late for you to be calling." "I know, but I wanted to talk to you without Mom listening. Grandma, is it true that you're sick?" My heart clenched. "What has your mother told you?" "She says you're not thinking clearly anymore, that you might hurt yourself if you keep living alone, and that we might need to put you somewhere safe. But when I saw you last week, you seemed fine to me." "I am fine, Sophia. I'm not sick, and I'm thinking very clearly." "Then why does Mom keep saying you need to move to one of those old people places?" I closed my eyes, hating that this child was being dragged into her mother's manipulation. "Your mother thinks she knows what's best for me, but she's wrong. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "That's what I thought. Grandma, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I heard Mom and Dad talking last night, and Dad said something about how much money they could make if you sold the house. Mom told him to be quiet, but I heard him say it." The confirmation of what I'd already suspected still hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter was conspiring to steal my home for financial gain while pretending it was for my own good. "Thank you for telling me that, sweetheart." "Grandma, are you gonna be okay?" I looked around my bedroom, at the furniture Theodore and I had chosen together, at the family photos that covered every surface, at the window that looked out over the garden where I had found peace every morning for nearly 5 decades. Yes, Sophia, I'm going to be just fine. And for the first time in weeks, I truly believed it. My appointment with Margaret Chen was scheduled for Thursday morning, but by Wednesday evening, I realized I needed more than just legal protection. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Vanessa and Bradley hadn't stumbled into this scheme overnight. They'd been planning it methodically for months, and I suspect there was more to their strategy than I'd discovered so far. I spent Wednesday night going through every document in Theodore's filing cabinet, every piece of financial paperwork I could find, trying to understand my complete situation. What I discovered surprised me. When Theodore died, I'd been so overwhelmed with grief and the logistics of settling his estate that I'd let our financial advisor, Harold Brennan, handle most of the details. Harold had been managing our investments for 15 years, and I'd trusted him to structure everything appropriately for a widow's needs. But as I sat at Theodore's old desk, surrounded by statements and documents I hadn't examined carefully in years, I began to understand that my financial position was far stronger than I'd realized. The life insurance payout had been substantial, the house was completely paid off, and our investment portfolio had grown significantly over the past 5 years. According to the most recent statements, my net worth was approaching $2 million. $2 million. That was the real reason Vanessa and Bradley were so determined to control my living situation. This wasn't about their concern for my welfare. It was about their access to a substantial inheritance they'd apparently decided should be available to them immediately rather than after my death. I called Harold Brennan first thing Thursday morning, before my appointment with Margaret Chen. "Harold, what a pleasant surprise. How are you managing? I hope you're not worrying about the accounts. Everything is performing very well." "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone else been asking about my finances?"
Has anyone from my family contacted you about my accounts, my investments, or my financial situation? Another pause, longer this time. Beatrice, I should probably discuss this with you in person. Can you come in today? This is important, Harold. Just tell me, has Vanessa or Bradley contacted you? Yes, he said quietly. Bradley called about 6 weeks ago. He said the family was concerned about your ability to manage your finances and wanted to understand the process for transferring management authority to them. My worst fears were confirmed. What did you tell him? I told him that you're perfectly competent to manage your own affairs and that any changes to account management would require your explicit written consent, preferably with legal representation present. Did he accept that? Not exactly. He suggested that you might not be thinking clearly about your future needs and that the family was considering legal action to protect your interests. He threatened to have me declared incompetent? He didn't use those words, but that was the implication. Beatrice, I have to tell you, his approach raised some serious red flags for me. I've been wondering if I should have called you immediately. What kind of red flags? He seemed more interested in accessing your assets than in protecting them. He asked specific questions about liquidating investments, about the process for transferring large sums, about whether there were any restrictions on accessing your accounts. Those aren't the questions someone asks when they're genuinely concerned about an elderly relative's welfare. After hanging up with Harold, I sat in Theodore's office feeling like I was seeing my situation with perfect clarity for the first time. This wasn't a family intervention motivated by love and concern. This was a calculated financial scheme, and I was the target. My appointment with Margaret Chen confirmed what I was beginning to understand about the scope of Vanessa and Bradley's plans. Beatrice, based on what you've told me about their behavior and what your financial advisor has shared, I believe your daughter and son-in-law are engaged in what the law calls financial elder abuse, Margaret said, sitting across from me in her office. This is a serious crime, and there are specific legal protections available to you. What kind of protections? First, we're going to establish what's called a durable power of attorney that specifically designates who can make financial decisions for you if you ever become truly incapacitated. Right now, you don't have those protections in place, which means that if something did happen to you, your assets could become subject to court proceedings that your family could potentially influence. Who should I designate? That's entirely up to you, but I'd recommend choosing someone who doesn't have a financial interest in your estate, perhaps one of your other children, or a trusted friend, or even a professional fiduciary. We spent an hour going through the legal documents that would protect me from the kind of manipulation Vanessa and Bradley were attempting. Margaret also explained the process for obtaining a restraining order if their harassment escalated, and she drafted a formal letter warning them that any further attempts to coerce me would result in criminal charges. Beatrice, I want you to understand something important, Margaret said as our meeting concluded. Everything you've described to me indicates that you're completely competent to make your own decisions. Any court would reach the same conclusion. Your daughter's threats about having you declared incompetent are essentially bluffs designed to frighten you into compliance. But they brought a psychiatrist to my house. Without your consent, that evaluation has no legal standing whatsoever. If they want to pursue competency proceedings, they'd need to provide evidence of actual cognitive impairment, which they don't have because it doesn't exist. Driving home from Margaret's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine confidence in my own power and autonomy. But I also felt a growing curiosity about exactly how deep Vanessa and Bradley's planning had gone. If they'd contacted my financial advisor and an estate management company, what else had they been doing behind my back? That afternoon, I did something that felt both necessary and slightly ridiculous. I hired a private investigator. I'd found Diana Walsh through an internet search for investigators who specialized in family law cases. Her website emphasized her experience with elder abuse cases and family financial disputes. When I called her office, she agreed to meet me that same day. Diana was perhaps 45, a former police detective who'd started her own investigation firm 5 years earlier. She had the kind of straightforward manner that made me feel immediately comfortable, and she listened to my story without judgment or surprise. Mrs. Thornfield, unfortunately, what you're describing is more common than most people realize. Adult children who see their aging parents as obstacles to wealth they consider rightfully theirs. The good news is that their behavior leaves a trail we can follow. What kind of trail? Phone records, email communications, financial inquiries, real estate consultations. If they've been planning this as systematically as you suspect, they've been documenting their activities without realizing they're creating evidence against themselves. Diana's investigation began immediately. Within 24 hours, she'd uncovered information that staggered me with its implications.
Mrs. Thornfield, your daughter and son-in-law have been much busier than you realized, Diana said when she called Friday evening. Bradley has made inquiries with 3 different real estate agencies about listing your property. He's also contacted 2 senior living facilities about reserving apartments for immediate occupancy. And here's the most concerning part. Vanessa has been researching the legal process for obtaining guardianship over an incapacitated adult. Guardianship? It's a legal proceeding where the court appoints someone to make decisions for a person who's been declared unable to manage their own affairs. If successful, it would give them complete control over your finances, your living situation, and essentially every aspect of your life. The enormity of what they'd been planning hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about pressuring me to move out of my house. They'd been systematically laying the groundwork to take complete control of my life and my assets. Is there more? Unfortunately, yes. I was able to access some of Bradley's email communications through a contact in the tech industry. He's been corresponding with a lawyer who specializes in elder law, specifically asking about the fastest way to obtain emergency guardianship in cases where an elderly person is allegedly in immediate danger. I felt sick. Emergency guardianship? It's a legal mechanism designed to protect elderly people who are in genuine crisis situations, but it can be abused by family members who manufacture evidence of crisis to gain quick control over an elderly relative's affairs. What kind of evidence would they need? Documented incidents of confusion, memory loss, inability to manage daily activities, financial mismanagement, safety concerns. Basically, all of the things they've been trying to document about your behavior. The pieces of their strategy were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The months of criticism about my home maintenance, the documentation of my supposed memory lapses, the pressure about my living situation, the attempt to bring a psychiatrist to my house, it had all been preparation for a legal proceeding designed to strip me of my autonomy entirely. Diana, how close are they to being able to file for guardianship? Based on what I found, they're probably still gathering what they consider evidence. But Mrs. Thornfield, I have to warn you, if they're planning to claim that you're in immediate danger, they could file for emergency guardianship with very little notice. You could wake up one morning to find that a court has temporarily suspended your legal rights pending a hearing. That weekend, I felt like I was living in a thriller novel, except the villains were my own family members, and the stakes were my freedom and dignity. I found myself looking over my shoulder when I worked in my garden, wondering if Vanessa was documenting my activities as evidence of my declining abilities. I second-guessed every decision, every routine task, wondering how it might be interpreted by someone looking for signs of incompetence. But I also felt a growing determination to fight back. They'd underestimated me completely, assuming I was a helpless old woman who would passively accept their plans for my future. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Diana's investigation continued to yield disturbing discoveries. On Monday, she called with news that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Thornfield, I found evidence that Vanessa has been in contact with your other children, but not the way you might expect." "What do you mean?" "She's been telling them that you've been declared incompetent and that she's been appointed your guardian. She's been asking them to sign documents transferring their potential inheritance claims to her, supposedly to simplify the estate management process. She's been lying to Marcus and James and Patricia?" "It appears so. She told Marcus that you'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia and that you'd agreed to have her handle your affairs. She told James that you'd been hospitalized after a fall and that the doctors recommended immediate placement in memory care." The scope of Vanessa's deception was breathtaking. She hadn't just been manipulating me, she'd been systematically lying to my other children to isolate me and position herself as my sole caretaker and heir. Have any of them signed anything? Not yet, according to the communications I've seen. But Marcus apparently expressed willingness to defer to Vanessa's judgment about your care, and Patricia seemed concerned enough about your supposed hospitalization to offer financial help with medical expenses. I felt a mixture of relief that my children hadn't betrayed me and fury that they'd been lied to so systematically. Vanessa hadn't just been stealing my autonomy, she'd been poisoning my relationships with my other children based on fabricated crises and fictional medical diagnoses. That evening, I called each of my children to tell them the truth about what their sister had been telling them. Marcus was the first to understand the full implications. "Mom, this is fraud. She's been lying to all of us to manipulate our response to her actions. We need to document everything and possibly pursue criminal charges." James, always the tech-savvy problem solver, offered to help gather electronic evidence of Vanessa's deceptions. "Mom, if she's been communicating these lies through email or text messages, we can preserve those communications as evidence." Patricia was perhaps the most heartbroken by the revelations. "I can't believe Vanessa would lie about something so serious. I was ready to fly out immediately when she told me you'd been hospitalized."
By the end of that week, Diana's investigation had uncovered what amounted to a comprehensive conspiracy. Vanessa and Bradley had been planning this takeover for nearly a year, systematically laying groundwork for legal proceedings that would give them complete control over my life and assets. They'd lied to my other children, misrepresented my condition to medical and legal professionals, made unauthorized inquiries about my finances, and begun making arrangements for the disposal of my property and possessions. But Diana had also uncovered something else, something that would prove to be the key to everything that happened next. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need to ask you about your late husband's business relationships," Diana said during our Friday meeting. "Did Theodore ever mention a partnership agreement or business investment involving Bradley?" "Not that I recall. Why?" "Because I found some interesting financial connections between Bradley's real estate business and some investments that were made during the last year of your husband's life." Diana spread out a series of documents on her desk, financial records that meant nothing to me but clearly meant something significant to her. It appears that Theodore invested a substantial sum in one of Bradley's real estate development projects about 6 months before he died. The investment was structured as a loan, with specific repayment terms. How substantial? $250,000, with repayment due 18 months after Theodore's death. According to these documents, that deadline was 3 months ago. I stared at the papers, trying to process what she was telling me. "You're saying Bradley owes me money?" "I'm saying Bradley owes you money, Mrs. Thornfield, a substantial amount of money that's now past due, plus accumulated interest and penalties." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with stunning clarity. Bradley's desperate urgency to gain control over my finances wasn't just about accessing my assets for their benefit. It was about preventing me from discovering that he owed me money he couldn't repay. "How much does he owe me now?" Diana consulted her notes. "With interest and penalties, approximately $320,000.
I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been struck by lightning. Not only had my daughter and son-in-law been planning to steal my independence and my assets, but they'd already stolen money from Theodore's estate, and their entire scheme was motivated by the need to cover up that theft. Diana, this changes everything, doesn't it? Yes, Mrs. Thornfield, it changes everything. That weekend, I sat in my garden, surrounded by the flowers Theodore and I had planted together, thinking about the man who'd promised to love and protect me until death parted us. Even in death, he was still protecting me through investments and legal documents that revealed the truth about the people who were trying to steal our life's work. But I was no longer thinking defensively about how to protect myself from Vanessa and Bradley's scheme. I was thinking offensively about how to turn their own greed and deception against them. They'd made one crucial mistake in all their careful planning. They assumed I was a helpless old woman who would passively accept their version of reality about my capabilities and my future. They were about to discover that they'd been planning to steal from someone much more formidable than they'd realized. And unlike their scheme, my response was going to be completely legal. Margaret Chen's reaction to Diana's discoveries was immediate and decisive. "Beatrice, we're no longer just defending you against harassment and manipulation," she said when I brought her the evidence of Bradley's debt. "We're now in a position to take offensive action against people who have defrauded you and are attempting to cover up that fraud through elder abuse." What are our options? Several. We can demand immediate repayment of the loan, plus interest and penalties. We can file a lien against Bradley's business assets. We can pursue criminal charges for financial elder abuse. And we can use this information to permanently shut down any attempt they might make to challenge your competency. But as satisfying as it would be to pursue legal action immediately, I was beginning to formulate a different kind of response, one that would be more devastating to Vanessa and Bradley than any court proceeding, because it would expose their scheme publicly and completely in front of everyone's opinion they cared about. "Margaret, before we file any legal actions, I want to try something else first. What do you have in mind?" I looked out her office window at the city where I'd lived for 70 years, where I'd raised my children and built my life with Theodore, where people knew me as a competent, intelligent woman who'd earned respect through decades of community involvement. I want to give them exactly what they've been asking for. I want to call their bluff. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was actually looking forward to my next conversation with my daughter.
My plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would invite Vanessa and Bradley to a family dinner at my house, ostensibly to discuss my decision about moving to assisted living. I would let them believe they'd finally worn me down, that I was ready to capitulate to their demands, and then, in front of witnesses they'd never expect, I would reveal everything I'd discovered about their scheme. But first, I needed to set the stage perfectly. I called Vanessa on Monday morning, using the defeated tone I'd perfected over the past few weeks of their harassment. "Vanessa, I've been thinking about everything you and Bradley have said about my living situation," I began, injecting just the right amount of weariness into my voice. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time for me to consider making some changes." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you're finally being reasonable about this. I know it's hard, but you'll see that this is really for the best. I'd like to have everyone over for dinner this Sunday, a proper family gathering so we can discuss the details and make sure I understand all my options." "That sounds perfect. Should I invite Dr. Pemberton again? He could help explain the benefits of transitional care." "No, I think I'd prefer to keep this just family for now. But I would like all my children to be here. I'll call Marcus and James and Patricia myself." "Mom, I'm not sure you need to involve everyone else in this decision. It might just complicate things unnecessarily." "Vanessa, if I'm going to be making major changes to my life, I want my whole family to understand what's happening and why. Surely you can understand that." She agreed, though I could hear the reluctance in her voice.
She and Bradley had been working hard to isolate me from my other children, and the last thing they wanted was Marcus, James, and Patricia asking inconvenient questions about their version of events. My next calls were to my other children, and these conversations were entirely different. Marcus, I need you to come to dinner on Sunday, and I need you to trust me when I tell you that it's going to be an evening none of us will ever forget. Mom, what are you planning? I'm planning to end this situation permanently, but I need all of you here as witnesses. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'll be there. Do you need me to bring anything? Just your father's old video camera. I want everything that happens on Sunday to be recorded. I made similar calls to James and Patricia, and by Friday evening, all the pieces were in place for what I was privately calling the reckoning. But I wasn't finished setting the stage. On Wednesday, I made 3 more calls that would prove crucial to the evening's events. The first was to Harold Brennan, my financial advisor. Harold, I'm going to need you to do something unusual for me this Sunday evening. I need you to come to my house for a family meeting about my finances. Beatrice, is everything all right? Everything is about to be much better than all right. I'm going to need you to bring complete documentation of my financial position, including the outstanding loan to Bradley Morrison. Are you planning to confront them about the debt? I'm planning to do much more than that. My second call was to Eleanor Ashford, the estate management specialist who'd warned me about Bradley's inquiries. Mrs. Ashford, you mentioned that my son-in-law had contacted you about managing the sale of my property and possessions. Yes, he seemed quite confident that you'd be transitioning to care soon. I'd like you to come to my house this Sunday evening to discuss his proposal in detail, in front of my entire family. Mrs. Thornfield, are you sure that's wise? This could be quite confrontational. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. My third call was to Diana Walsh, my private investigator. Diana, I'm going to need you to present your findings to my family this Sunday. All of them. I want everyone to understand exactly what Vanessa and Bradley have been planning. Mrs. Thornfield, are you sure you want to handle it this way? We could pursue legal action without a family confrontation. Diana, these people have spent months trying to destroy my dignity and steal my independence. They've lied to my other children, manipulated my emotions, and planned to have me declared incompetent. A quiet legal proceeding isn't enough. I want them to face the consequences of their actions in front of everyone they've lied to. By Friday, I was ready. I'd spent the week preparing my house for what would be either the most satisfying dinner party of my life or the complete destruction of my family relationships. But given what Vanessa and Bradley had already done to those relationships, I felt like I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I prepared Theodore's favorite meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables from my garden, and the apple pie recipe that had been in my family for 3 generations. If this was going to be the last time I hosted my children in this house, I wanted it to be memorable from more than just the confrontation. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, perfectly matching my mood as I made final preparations. I'd arranged the dining room table to seat 8 people, my 4 children, Bradley, Harold, Eleanor, and Diana. I'd set it with my best china, the wedding set that Theodore and I had chosen together 50 years ago and used only for the most special occasions.
At 5 o'clock, I heard the first car in my driveway. Through the window, I watched Marcus emerge from his sedan, followed by his wife, Sarah, whom I'd also invited as an additional witness. They were followed immediately by James, who'd flown in from California the night before, and Patricia, who'd driven down with her husband, Tom. My children approached the house with the cautious air of people who weren't entirely sure what they were walking into, but who trusted their mother enough to show up when she asked them to. "Mom," Marcus said as I opened the door, "whatever you're planning, we're behind you 100%. At 5:30, Vanessa and Bradley arrived, and I could see immediately that they were suspicious about the number of cars in my driveway. They approached the front door with the wary confidence of people who thought they were in control, but were beginning to sense that something was different. "Mom, I thought you said this was going to be a small family gathering," Vanessa said as I let them in. "What are Marcus and James and Patricia doing here?" "They're here because this concerns all of my children, not just you, and I've invited a few other people who I thought should be part of this conversation." Before she could ask who else was coming, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Harold Brennan standing on my porch with his briefcase, looking every inch the professional financial advisor. "Vanessa, Bradley, I'd like you to meet Harold Brennan, who's been managing the family finances since your father's death." Bradley's face went white. He clearly recognized Harold's name, though they'd never met in person. "Mom, why is your financial advisor here?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Because we're going to be discussing my finances, and I thought it would be helpful to have an expert present." The doorbell rang again before she could respond. This time, it was Eleanor Ashford from Ashford Estate Management, looking elegant and professional in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Eleanor Ashford from Ashford Estate Management. Bradley, I believe you've spoken on the phone?" If Bradley had been pale before, he was now absolutely ashen. Eleanor smiled at him with professional courtesy, but there was steel in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, yes, we've spoken. I'm looking forward to clarifying some details about your inquiry regarding Mrs. Thornfield's estate." The final guest arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Diana Walsh looked exactly like what she was, a former police detective who'd seen everything and was impressed by very little. She carried a briefcase that I knew contained enough evidence to destroy Vanessa and Bradley's lives, and she surveyed the room with the calm assessment of someone who was very good at her job. "And this is Diana Walsh," I announced to the room at large. "She's a private investigator who's been helping me understand some recent developments in my life." Vanessa finally found her voice. "Mom, what is going on here? Why have you invited all these strangers to a family dinner?" "They're not strangers, Vanessa. They're the people who've been helping me understand what you and Bradley have been planning to do to me." I gestured for everyone to take their seats around the dining room table. My children and their spouses sat with expressions of intense curiosity. Harold, Eleanor, and Diana took their places with professional composure. Vanessa and Bradley remained standing, looking like they were calculating their options for escape. "Please, everyone, sit down," I said firmly. "We have a lot to discuss, and I'd like to do it in a civilized manner." Marcus had positioned Theodore's video camera on the buffet, aimed directly at the table, and I could see the red recording light that indicated everything was being preserved for posterity. "Mom, I don't think this is appropriate," Bradley said, still standing. "These are private family matters. They shouldn't be discussed in front of strangers." "Sit down, Bradley," I said, and something in my voice made him comply immediately. Once everyone was seated, I remained standing at the head of the table, looking at each face in turn. My other children looked supportive, but puzzled. The professionals looked alert and ready. Vanessa and Bradley looked like convicted criminals waiting for sentencing. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began. "I know this is an unusual gathering, but recent events have made it necessary. For the past several months, my daughter Vanessa and her husband Bradley have been conducting a campaign to convince me that I'm no longer competent to live independently in my own home." Vanessa started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "They've told me that my other children are concerned about my mental state, that I'm showing signs of dementia, that I'm a danger to myself, and that the only solution is for me to move to assisted living while they take control of my finances and dispose of my property." I paused to let that sink in before continuing. What they didn't expect was that I would investigate their claims and discover the truth about what they've been planning to do to me. I nodded to Harold, who opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. Harold, would you please explain to everyone the current state of my financial affairs? Harold cleared his notes and consulted his notes. Mrs. Thornfield currently has a net worth of approximately $1.9 million, consisting of investment accounts, life insurance proceeds, and her home, which is owned free and clear. She is in excellent financial health and has more than adequate resources to maintain her current lifestyle indefinitely.
I watched Vanessa and Bradley exchange glances, and I could see them trying to calculate how much Harold knew about their activities. Harold, have you had any unauthorized inquiries about my accounts? Yes. Approximately 6 weeks ago, Mr. Morrison contacted me asking about the process for transferring management authority over your accounts to family members. He indicated that the family was considering legal action to establish guardianship. Patricia gasped. Guardianship? Mom, you never mentioned guardianship. Because I didn't know about it until this week, I replied. Diana, would you please share what your investigation discovered about my daughter and son-in-law's activities? Diana opened her own briefcase and removed a stack of documents that she spread across the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Over the past year, Mrs. Morrison and Mr. Morrison have engaged in systematic preparation for what appears to be financial elder abuse. She began in the calm, factual tone of someone who testified in court many times. They have contacted multiple real estate agencies about listing this property, reserved apartments at senior living facilities, researched emergency guardianship procedures, and made false statements to family members about Mrs. Thornfield's medical condition. James leaned forward, his face dark with anger. What kind of false statements? Mrs. Morrison told your brother Marcus that your mother had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. She told you that your mother had been hospitalized after a fall and needed immediate memory care. She told Patricia that your mother had agreed to guardianship proceedings and was asking for financial help with medical expenses. The room erupted in outraged voices as my children turned to stare at Vanessa, who was now visibly trembling. You told us Mom was sick? Marcus demanded. You made us think she was dying? You lied about her being in the hospital, James added, his voice rising. Patricia was crying. I was ready to fly out here immediately. I was terrified that something terrible had happened to her. Let me finish, Diana said firmly, and the room fell silent. In addition to these deceptions, Mr. Morrison has made specific inquiries about liquidating Mrs. Thornfield's assets and has prepared documentation for emergency guardianship proceedings that would give them complete control over her finances and living situation. She paused and looked directly at Bradley. Mr. Morrison, would you like to explain to the family why you've been so eager to gain control over your mother-in-law's finances? Bradley's face was now gray and sweat was beading on his forehead. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Diana consulted her notes. Then perhaps you can explain the status of the loan Mrs. Thornfield's late husband made to your real estate company 18 months ago. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. What loan? Vanessa whispered. Harold opened another folder. 6 months before his death, Theodore Thornfield loaned $250,000 to Bradley Morrison's company for a real estate development project. The loan was due for repayment 3 months ago. With accumulated interest and penalties, the current amount owed is $320,000. I watched my daughter's face as she processed this information, saw the exact moment when she understood that her husband had been lying to her just as systematically as they'd been lying to everyone else. Bradley, she said quietly, is this true? I can explain, began, but I cut him off. No, Bradley, you can't explain, because there is no explanation that justifies what you've done. You borrowed money from my dying husband, money you knew you couldn't repay, and when the loan came due, instead of admitting your failure or asking for more time, you decided to steal my independence and my assets to cover your debt. I turned to Vanessa, feeling a mixture of fury and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm me. And you, Vanessa, were so eager to help him that you were willing to destroy your relationship with your siblings? Lie about my health, and plan to have me declared incompetent?
All to help your husband steal money from your own family? Mom, I didn't know about the loan, Vanessa said desperately. I thought we were trying to help you. Help me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. By lying to your siblings about my health? By documenting my every mistake to use as evidence against me? By bringing psychiatrists to my home without my consent? By making arrangements to sell my house and dispose of my possessions without my knowledge? Eleanor Ashford spoke for the first time since being introduced. Mrs. Morrison, your husband contacted my firm 6 weeks ago to arrange what he called complete estate liquidation services. He expected the process to begin within a month and seemed quite confident that Mrs. Thornfield would be transitioning to care whether she wanted to or not. The room fell silent again as the full scope of their planning became clear to everyone present. Mom, said Marcus quietly, this is criminal. They need to be prosecuted. Actually, I said, reaching into my own briefcase, that's not going to be necessary. I removed a stack of legal documents that Margaret Chen had prepared for me and placed them on the table. Because Bradley and Vanessa are going to make this right, starting tonight. I spread out the papers so everyone could see them. These are legal documents that will resolve the situation permanently. The first document is a formal demand for immediate repayment of the loan, plus interest and penalties. The second is a restraining order that prohibits Bradley and Vanessa from contacting me, visiting my property, or making any inquiries about my finances or medical condition.
Bradley found his voice. I don't have $320,000. I know you don't. That's why the third document is an agreement for you to transfer ownership of your business assets to me in lieu of cash payment. You can't do this. Actually, I can. You signed a loan agreement with my husband that included specific remedies for default. Taking possession of your business assets is one of those remedies. I turned to Vanessa, who was staring at the documents with horror. And you, Vanessa, are going to sign a statement acknowledging that you lied about my medical condition, that you attempted to manipulate your siblings, and that you participated in a scheme to defraud me. This statement will be filed with the district attorney's office and will prevent you from ever again claiming that I'm incompetent. Mom, please, Vanessa whispered. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter, I replied. The daughter I raised would never have done what you've done. I don't know who you are anymore. I looked around the table at the faces of my family and the professionals who'd helped me uncover the truth. I want everyone here to understand something very clearly. I am 70 years old, I am in excellent health, I am perfectly competent to make my own decisions, and I will be living in this house for as long as I choose. Anyone who attempts to interfere with my autonomy will face immediate legal consequences. Bradley was studying the legal documents with the desperate attention of someone looking for an escape that didn't exist. What happens if we refuse to sign these? Diana answered before I could. Then, Mrs. Thornfield files criminal charges for financial elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Based on the evidence I've gathered, you'd both be looking at significant prison time. And, Harold added, I would be required to report the loan default to the appropriate authorities, which would result in immediate foreclosure proceedings against your business. And, Eleanor concluded, I would be obligated to report your attempt to arrange fraudulent estate sales to the state attorney general's office. Bradley looked at Vanessa, who was crying silently into her hands. How long do we have to decide? You don't, I said firmly. You sign these documents tonight, or I make the phone calls tomorrow morning. The signing took 20 minutes. Bradley's hand shook as he transferred ownership of his business assets to satisfy the debt. Vanessa's tears fell onto the paper as she signed her confession and the agreement to stay away from me permanently. When it was finished, I looked at my youngest daughter for what I knew would be the last time. Vanessa, I want you to understand something. I would have given you anything you needed if you'd simply asked. If Bradley was in financial trouble, if you needed help with Sophia's college expenses, if you wanted a down payment for a bigger house, anything, all you had to do was be honest with me. Mom, But instead, you chose to lie, manipulate, and scheme. You were willing to destroy my dignity and steal my independence for money.
and that's something I can never forgive. After they left, my other children and I sat in the living room, emotionally drained but relieved. The professionals had departed with their signed documents and assurances that the legal proceedings would move forward smoothly. "Mom," Patricia said, "I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening sooner." "You couldn't have known. They were very careful to lie to each of you individually, and I was too embarrassed to tell you what was really going on." Marcus was rewinding the video camera. "Mom, I have to ask, what are you going to do now?" I looked around the living room where I'd raised my children, at the family photos that covered every surface, at the furniture Theodore and I had chosen together. "I'm going to live my life exactly the way I want to live it. I'm going to work in my garden, read my books, have dinner with my friends, and enjoy my independence. And I'm going to do it all right here in my own home." "What about Vanessa and Bradley's business?" "I'm going to sell it and donate the proceeds to an organization that fights elder abuse. Theodore's money is going to help other people in my situation, people whose families are trying to steal their dignity." 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden on a beautiful spring morning, watching the hummingbirds visit the flowers Theodore and I planted together. The house behind me is exactly as it should be. Mine, peaceful, and filled with the memories of a life well lived. Vanessa and Bradley lost their house, their business, and their social standing when the truth about their scheme became public. They moved across the country to start over, and I hope they've learned something from the experience. Sophia, my granddaughter, calls me occasionally, and I've made it clear that she's always welcome in my home, regardless of what her parents have done. My other children visit regularly, and our relationships are stronger than they've ever been. They understand now how precious independence is, how quickly it can be stolen, and how important it is to protect the dignity of the people we love. I kept my promise to myself. I'm living exactly the life I want to live, in my own home, on my own terms. At 70 years old, I've learned that the most important thing you can possess isn't money or property or even family relationships. It's the right to make your own choices about your own life. And that's something no one can take away from you, unless you let them.
I never let them. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who thought they knew what was best for you? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were planning something behind your back? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this message of independence and dignity has traveled. Because sometimes the people who try to control your life learn that you're much stronger than they ever imagined.